She loved it here. She spent most of her time here. Showing you around today is very much a case I'm trying to make sure I'm doing it the way she'd want you to see it.
A shocking discovery on the grounds of Sandringham Estate has triggered an unprecedented royal showdown. Breaking all protocol, Prince William reportedly confronted his stepbrother, Tom Parker Bowles, directly over a find serious enough to demand immediate action. The fallout from that explosive meeting has left Buckingham Palace in a state of chaos it hasn't seen in years. The discovery that started everything. Sandringham is not simply a royal estate. That is the first thing you need to understand before any of what follows makes complete sense. It is not a property managed by committees or administered by the Crown Estate or overseen by government-appointed trustees. It is personally owned, privately held, passed from monarch to monarch as the most intimate kind of inheritance the British royal family has, the kind that does not come with constitutional obligations or public accountability, the kind that belongs, in the most fundamental sense, to the family itself. Queen Elizabeth II loved Sandringham with a particular depth that went beyond even her well-documented affection for Balmoral. She spent the final weeks of every year there. She walked its grounds in the early mornings before her household was fully awake. She knew every path, every gate, every corner of its vast and carefully maintained landscape. It was the place, more than any other, where she was simply herself, not the monarch, not the institution, just a woman on her own land. When she died in September 2022, Sandringham passed to Charles. And when Charles's health began its serious decline, the question of Sandringham's future became one of the many things William was quietly beginning to think about and prepare for. Not with impatience, not with the eagerness of a man counting down to an inheritance, but with the careful, responsible attention of someone who understood that one of the most significant privately held properties in Britain required thoughtful stewardship, and that the time to begin thinking about that stewardship was before it became urgent. He had been paying attention to the estate's management. He had been visiting. He had been asking questions of the staff who ran the property on a daily basis. And in doing so, he had built a picture of Sandringham's current state that was detailed enough to notice when something within that picture did not belong. What he discovered in the third week of January 2026 did not belong, not even slightly. The discovery came through one of the estate's senior land managers, a man who had worked at Sandringham for over 15 years and who had, in that time, developed the kind of intimate knowledge of the property that comes only from daily presence across seasons and years. He knew what was normal. He knew what had always been there and what had not. And what he found during a routine inspection of one of the estate's more private sections, a stretch of land bordering the northern edge of the formal gardens that received very little regular traffic, was not something that should have been there. The details of exactly what was found have been carefully controlled by the palace. The household has not issued a public statement. No official briefing has been provided to the royal press corps. And the individuals with direct knowledge of the specifics have been notably disciplined about keeping those specifics out of circulation. But sources with knowledge of the situation have confirmed enough to understand the nature and the seriousness of what was discovered. What the land manager found was evidence of unauthorized access and unauthorized activity on a protected section of the estate. Activity that had occurred not once, but on multiple occasions over a period that sources suggest extended back several months. Activity that, when its nature was assessed by the relevant household officials, pointed clearly and uncomfortably toward a single individual with both the motivation and the access to have been responsible for it. That individual was Tom Parker Bowles. The land manager brought his findings to the estate's head of security the same afternoon. The head of security prepared a documented report and submitted it through the appropriate channels to William's office within 48 hours. And William, who was already managing a significant volume of institutional pressures connected to the broader palace situation, received that report on a Friday morning and cleared his schedule for the rest of the day. Sources close to his household describe his response to what he read as controlled. That word is important. Not angry in the way that produces immediate and visible reaction. Controlled in the way that produces careful and decisive action. He read the report in full. He asked for supplementary information on 2 specific points. He consulted with his legal advisor for approximately 1 hour, and then he made a decision about what he was going to do next. He was going to speak to Tom Parker Bowles directly, in person, without intermediaries. Without the buffer of legal representatives or communications advisors, or the kind of carefully managed palace diplomacy that turns direct confrontations into drawn-out institutional processes, just William and Tom. In a room, with the documented evidence of what had been found sitting between them. That decision tells you something important about where William's head was in that moment. He could have referred the matter to his legal team entirely and allowed the institutional machinery to handle it at a distance. He could have communicated his response through the household's formal channels and avoided any direct personal engagement with the situation. He could have managed it quietly and kept it contained within the administrative structures designed for exactly this kind of sensitive internal matter. He chose none of those options. He chose to go directly. And the reason he chose that, sources confirm, was not simply about the specific discovery at Sandringham. It was about everything the discovery represented in the context of a pattern he had been watching develop for considerably longer than this single incident suggested. He had questions, and he wanted answers that came from Tom's mouth rather than from a letter drafted by Tom's solicitor. What those questions were, and what happened when William finally sat across from Camilla's son and asked them, is the part of this story that nobody inside the palace is comfortable discussing. But the outline of it has emerged, and it is more significant than most people outside those walls currently realize. Tom Parker Bowles and the Sandringham connection. To understand why Tom Parker Bowles had any connection to Sandringham at all, you have to go back to the beginning of Charles and Camilla's marriage in 2005. Because that marriage did not simply bring Camilla into the royal family. It brought her children, Tom and his sister Laura. Two adults who had grown up entirely outside the royal world and who suddenly found themselves, through no particular choice of their own, adjacent to one of the most scrutinized institutions on the planet. Tom navigated that transition in a way that was, by most accounts, reasonably graceful. He did not seek a formal royal role. He did not attempt to leverage his mother's new position in ways that generated immediate institutional concern. He continued his career as a food writer and cultural commentator. He maintained a public profile that was connected to the royal world through his mother, but not dependent on it in ways that created obvious problems. Over time, however, that adjacency to the royal world began to develop in ways that were less straightforward, not dramatically, not through any single obvious overreach, but gradually, through the accumulation of small extensions and quiet assumptions about what his proximity to the crown entitled him to access and to consider. Sandringham entered that picture through a specific route. In the years following Charles and Camilla's marriage, Tom had visited the estate on a small number of occasions as a family guest. These were private visits, entirely appropriate, the kind of thing that happens when a senior royal's family member attends a gathering at a property the royal family uses as a personal retreat. Nothing about those early visits attracted any concern or attention. But somewhere between those early appropriate visits and the situation that William's land manager discovered in January 2026, something had changed. The visits had continued beyond the occasions that warranted them. The access Tom had been extended as a family guest had been treated, sources suggest, as something considerably more open-ended than it was ever intended to be. And the activities associated with his presence on the estate had developed in directions that had nothing to do with family visits and everything to do with the commercial ambitions that had already caused significant institutional concern in connection with other royal properties. Sources familiar with the timeline describe a pattern that developed gradually across 2024 and into 2025. Tom had been visiting Sandringham with a frequency that went well beyond any family occasion that would have justified it. He had been accessing sections of the estate that were not part of the areas made available to family guests. And he had been doing so without the knowledge or approval of the estate's management team, which meant without the knowledge of the people responsible for reporting unusual activity to William's office. He had, in other words, been treating a privately owned royal estate as though his mother's position gave him personal latitude over it. As though the fact that Charles and Camilla used Sandringham as a private retreat translated into some form of extended access for Camilla's son that the estate's formal management structures did not need to be involved in or informed about. That assumption was wrong, fundamentally, completely, and in ways that the discovery in January 2026 made impossible to overlook. What makes the Sandringham situation particularly significant is the specific nature of the estate and what Tom's unauthorized presence on its most private sections implied about his intentions. Sandringham is not simply a large country house with extensive grounds. It contains within its boundaries a number of specific areas and specific assets that carry considerable value of various kinds: agricultural land, historic structures, private woodland, and in certain sections of the estate, features connected to the royal family's most personal use of the property that have never been publicly documented or commercially assessed. The section of the estate where the land manager's discovery was made was not a publicly accessible area. It was not a section used for any of the estate's commercial activities: the farm shop, the visitor facilities that operate on a limited basis in certain parts of the grounds. It was a genuinely private section, one that a casual visitor would have had no reason to access, and no way of accessing without a specific and deliberate decision to go beyond the areas where family guests were permitted to be. Tom had been there multiple times, and the evidence of what he had been doing there pointed, sources confirm, toward the same pattern of commercial assessment and planning that had already characterized his approach to other protected royal properties. He had been looking at Sandringham the way he had looked at Elmridge Park, the way he had looked at other estates connected to the royal family's private holdings, not as a family member visiting a relative's home, as a commercial operator assessing an asset. The difference between Sandringham and the other properties was one of scale and one of personal significance. Elmridge Park was a protected estate with deep personal meaning to the royal family. Sandringham was something beyond that. It was the most personally owned, most privately significant property in the entire royal family's possession. It was the place Elizabeth had loved most deeply. It was the place where the family had gathered for generations to be simply themselves away from the public world. And Tom Parker Bowles had been walking its most private sections, apparently assessing its commercial potential for months without telling anyone. When William read the land manager's report and understood the full picture of what had been happening, two things became immediately clear to him. The first was that this could not be handled through the normal institutional channels that managed boundary violations and unauthorized access. The second was that the person who needed to answer for it was not a courtier or a member of staff or even a legal representative. It was Tom, directly, immediately, and in person. The confrontation that followed was one that sources describe as unlike anything the palace has witnessed in recent memory. The confrontation. The meeting took place in the last week of January 2026. It was not arranged through the usual channels of palace diplomacy. There was no exchange of formal requests through respective offices, no scheduling of a mutually convenient time through intermediaries. William made the decision to speak to Tom directly, and the meeting was arranged with a speed and a directness that left Tom very little room to prepare or to position himself before it happened. Sources familiar with the circumstances describe a meeting that took place at a private location, not at any of the official royal residences, not at a venue that would attract attention or generate the kind of staff presence that turns a private conversation into an institutional event, just the two of them. With a copy of the land manager's documented report and the supplementary information William's office had assembled in the days following the initial discovery, William arrived prepared. That is the detail that those with knowledge of the meeting consistently emphasize. He had not called this meeting to express frustration or to deliver a warning. He had called it to present documented evidence of specific unauthorized activity and to obtain a direct explanation from the person the evidence pointed to. He had questions. They were specific, they were sequenced, and they were not the kind of questions that could be deflected through vague generalities or charming social deflection. Tom, by all accounts, did not expect the level of specificity William brought to the room. Sources suggest he had been aware that something had been noticed at Sandringham. The speed with which the meeting had been arranged had signaled that whatever had been discovered was being treated seriously. But the documented detail of what William placed before him, the specific dates, the specific locations within the estate, the specific evidence of what had been found and what it implied, that level of preparation had not been anticipated. The early part of the meeting was dominated by William presenting what he had, methodically, without raised voices, without the kind of emotional display that would have given Tom something to respond to emotionally rather than factually. Just the evidence, laid out in the order that made its significance most legible, with the quiet authority of a man who had done this before and knew exactly how it worked. Tom's initial response, sources describe, was an attempt to contextualize, to place his presence on the estate within the framework of family access, to suggest that his visits had been connected to legitimate family occasions and that any impression of unauthorized activity reflected a misunderstanding of the arrangements rather than any deliberate overreach. William listened to that response without interruption, and then he asked the specific question that dismantled it completely. He asked Tom to identify the family occasion that had brought him to the specific section of the estate where the land manager's discovery had been made on the specific dates documented in the report. There was no family occasion. Tom knew it. William knew it. And the silence that followed that question was, sources say, the moment the nature of the meeting shifted entirely. What came next was a conversation that moved beyond the specific discovery at Sandringham and into territory that was considerably broader and considerably more uncomfortable for Tom. Because William did not simply want to address the Sandringham situation in isolation, he wanted to address the pattern, the accumulation of incidents across multiple properties, the consistent approach to royal estates that treated their commercial potential as something Tom had a personal right to assess and exploit. He raised Elmridge Park. He raised the other situations that had generated institutional concern over the preceding months. And he placed all of it, including Sandringham, within a single coherent account of behavior that he described, in terms that sources characterize as measured but completely unambiguous, as a fundamental violation of the trust that came with proximity to the royal family. Tom attempted, at various points during this portion of the meeting, to separate the individual incidents, to argue that each situation had its own context and its own explanation, and that the pattern William was describing was not an accurate characterization of his intentions or his conduct. He was not, he insisted, attempting to exploit his mother's position. He was simply someone with a genuine interest in heritage and hospitality, who had perhaps allowed that interest to take him further than was appropriate. William's response to that characterization was, sources say, the most direct thing he said during the entire meeting. He told Tom that the question of intention was almost beside the point, that the effect of what he had been doing, regardless of what he intended by it, was to treat privately owned royal properties as commercial assets available for his personal assessment and development, that this was not acceptable, that it had not been acceptable when it involved other properties, and that its extension to Sandringham, the most personally significant privately owned estate in the royal family's possession, represented a crossing of a line that he was not prepared to treat as a misunderstanding or a matter of degree. He then told Tom, in terms that left absolutely no room for subsequent reinterpretation, what the consequences of any further unauthorized activity connected to any royal property would be. The consequences were institutional, legal, and personal. They were specific enough that Tom would have understood exactly what he was being told. And they were delivered with the quiet, complete certainty of a man who had already decided that the time for informal management of this situation had definitively passed. The meeting ended shortly after that. It had lasted less than an hour. Tom left without the kind of resolution that would have allowed either party to present it as a productive conversation. And William returned to his office and immediately instructed his legal team to begin the formal process of documenting the Sandringham discovery for the household's official records. He was not leaving this one to memory or good faith. He was putting it on paper, permanently. And Camilla, who learned about the confrontation within hours of its conclusion, faced a situation that was in certain respects worse than anything that had come before. Camilla's impossible position. There is a specific kind of difficulty that arrives when the person causing the crisis is someone you love unconditionally. When the institution demanding accountability is the one you have spent 20 years trying to earn a permanent place inside. When the man delivering that demand for accountability is your stepson. And when the damage being done is happening in real time, in documented form, in ways that your position gives you no legitimate basis to contest or override. That is the position Camilla found herself in during the final days of January 2026. And sources close to the household describe it as the most personally destabilizing situation she had faced since the earliest years of her marriage to Charles, when the weight of public hostility toward her was at its most intense, and her foothold inside the institution was at its most uncertain. She learned about the confrontation the same evening it took place. Tom called her. The conversation was private, and its specific contents have not been reported in any detail. But sources familiar with Camilla's response, in the hours and days that followed, describe a woman processing several things simultaneously. The shock of the Sandringham discovery itself, the seriousness of what William had said to Tom during the meeting, and the deeply uncomfortable recognition that her son had placed her in a position she had absolutely no good way of navigating. She was queen consort, Tom was her son, William was the future king, and the situation connecting all three of them was documented, formal, and serious enough that none of the usual tools of family diplomacy were available to her. She could not go to William and ask him to reconsider his response. The evidence was what it was. The pattern it documented was real. And William had already made clear, through the institutional steps he took immediately following the meeting, that he was not treating this as a family matter to be managed through quiet conversation. He was treating it as a documented breach with formal consequences. She could not publicly support Tom's position. There was no legitimate version of his position that could be publicly defended. He had been on a privately owned royal estate without authorization. He had been in sections of that estate that had no connection to any family occasion that justified his presence. The evidence was documented, and the documentation was in William's hands. And she could not ask Charles to intervene in a way that challenged or reversed what William had done. Charles had been briefed on the Sandringham discovery and on the confrontation that followed. Sources close to the king describe a man who received that briefing with the particular quality of pained resignation that has characterized his response to the accumulating crises connected to Camilla's family. He did not defend Tom. He did not question William's handling of the situation. He expressed, privately and without any public dimension, his personal distress at the position the family was in. And he did nothing that could be interpreted as a challenge to the institutional authority William had exercised. That left Camilla entirely without leverage. In a situation that directly affected her son, her relationship with her stepson, and her standing inside the household she had worked so hard to make her home, she had no move available to her that did not make the situation worse. She attempted one approach. Through a senior aide, she made contact with William's office in the days following the confrontation. The message was carefully worded. It expressed her personal distress about the situation. It emphasized her lack of any prior knowledge of Tom's activities at Sandringham. It offered her willingness to speak with William directly if he believed that would be helpful. William's office received the message. The response was courteous and brief. William appreciated her reaching out. He did not believe a direct conversation at this stage would be productive. The matter was being handled through the appropriate institutional channels, and he expected it to remain there. That response told Camilla everything she needed to know about where she stood. William was not angry with her personally in the way that generates confrontation and demands response. He was something more difficult to navigate than angry. He was resolved. He had assessed the situation, taken the necessary steps, and moved forward. And he was not looking for a conversation with Camilla that might complicate or soften the institutional position he had already established. For Camilla, the implications extended well beyond the immediate situation. Because the Sandringham discovery and the confrontation that followed had done something that all of the previous incidents connected to Tom had not quite managed to do. It had placed the question of Tom's conduct and Camilla's proximity to that conduct directly inside the most sacred private space in the royal family's possession. Previous incidents had involved protected estates and commercial schemes that were serious, but that existed at a certain remove from the most personal dimensions of royal life. Sandringham was different. It was where Elizabeth had spent her final Christmases. It was where the family gathered in its most private and most human form. It was the property whose management would pass to William when Charles died, and that William already considered, in every meaningful sense, part of his most direct inheritance. Tom had been walking its private sections without permission, assessing it. And the discovery of that fact had produced a confrontation between William and Camilla's son that was now formally documented in the royal household's official records. Camilla understood what that documentation meant. It meant that whatever happened next, there was now a permanent institutional record of a serious breach connected to her son at Sandringham. A record that would exist long after the immediate situation had been managed. A record that would form part of the documented history of this period inside the royal household. She could not remove it. She could not soften it. She could not ask William to reconsider it. She could only live with it. And figure out how to maintain any semblance of a functional relationship with a stepson who had just demonstrated, with complete and documented clarity, exactly where his tolerance for the Parker Bowles family's approach to royal property had reached its absolute limit. What Sandringham means and why this matters. Step back from the specific details of what happened in January 2026 and look at the broader picture. Because the confrontation between William and Tom Parker Bowles was not simply an isolated incident involving unauthorized access to a royal estate. It was the most recent and most significant episode in a story that has been developing across several years. And its location at Sandringham specifically is not incidental to its meaning. It is central to it. Sandringham occupies a position in the British royal family's private geography that is unlike any other property in its possession. It is not the most famous. It is not the most photographed. It is not the estate most associated with the public face of the monarchy. But it is, by the consistent testimony of every member of the royal family who has spoken about it with any degree of personal candor, the most deeply private, the most genuinely personal. The place where the family exists most completely outside the institutional structures that govern everything else in their lives. Queen Elizabeth understood this. She protected it accordingly. She was meticulous about who had access to its most private sections and what that access was used for. She understood that a property this personal required a level of stewardship that went beyond the management of its agricultural land and its visitor facilities. It required the protection of its character, its privacy, its essential quality as a place where the royal family could be something other than a public institution. William has inherited that understanding completely, and what the Sandringham discovery told him was that someone had been treating that most private of royal spaces as a commercial opportunity, had been walking its private sections with the eye of an operator rather than the respect of a guest, had extended a family connection into something that bore no relationship to what that connection was ever intended to provide. That realization produced in William something that sources describe as a very specific and very deep form of anger. Not the reactive anger of someone caught off guard, but the cold, settled anger of someone whose most important boundaries have been crossed in the most personal possible place. The kind of anger that does not dissipate quickly and does not respond to apology or explanation in the way that more reactive anger sometimes can. The documentation William ordered immediately following the confrontation was the first expression of that anger in institutional form. By directing his legal team to formally record the discovery and the confrontation in the household's official records, he ensured that what had happened at Sandringham was not simply a private family matter that could be allowed to fade with time. It was now part of the permanent institutional record, with dates, with evidence, with the full weight of formal documentation behind it. That decision has consequences that extend well beyond the immediate situation. Because the formal documentation creates a foundation for whatever steps William chooses to take next, it establishes, on the permanent record, a pattern of behavior that now spans multiple properties and multiple incidents across a period of several years. It connects the Sandringham discovery to the Elmridge Park situation, to the access log anomalies, to the removed advisors, to the full accumulation of evidence that William has been quietly assembling about the approach of Camilla's family to royal heritage assets. Taken individually, each incident might be characterized as an isolated lapse, a misunderstanding about boundaries, an enthusiasm for heritage and hospitality that occasionally overstepped without malicious intent. That characterization was always weak. It is now essentially impossible to sustain, because the pattern is documented, it is formal, and it sits in the household's official records with William's name attached to the instruction that put it there. For Tom Parker Bowles, the consequences of the Sandringham confrontation are significant and long-term. His access to royal properties has been formally reviewed and restricted. Sources confirm that the informal latitude he had previously enjoyed as Camilla's son, the kind of family adjacency that had allowed him to be present at various royal occasions and properties without the kind of formal oversight that would apply to an outside visitor, has been significantly curtailed. He is not banned from all contact with the royal family. He is not formally excluded from every occasion that involves his mother. But the easy, unmonitored access that characterized his relationship with royal properties over the previous decade is gone. Permanently and formally gone. For the palace more broadly, the Sandringham confrontation sends a signal that resonates across every person connected to the royal family in any capacity. William is protecting these properties with the full force of his institutional authority. He is not managing boundary violations informally or absorbing them as the cost of maintaining family harmony. He is documenting them, addressing them directly, and ensuring that the consequences are real enough to function as genuine deterrents. That is a different kind of royal household management from anything the palace has seen in recent decades. Previous generations of royal leadership absorbed a considerable amount of boundary testing from family members and their extended circles in the interests of keeping the peace and maintaining the appearance of family unity. William has made clear, through his handling of the Sandringham situation, as through everything that preceded it, that he does not consider that approach compatible with the institution he is building. Princess Anne, whose judgment William trusts more consistently than almost anyone else inside the family, was briefed on the Sandringham confrontation and its aftermath. Her response, according to sources familiar with her reaction, was characteristically direct. She said that William had handled it correctly, that Sandringham demanded exactly the response it received, and that the documentation William had ordered was not simply appropriate, but necessary for the long-term protection of the estate and everything it represented. Coming from Anne, that assessment carries considerable weight. She does not distribute praise casually. She does not endorse decisions she has reservations about, simply to maintain family solidarity. Her unqualified support for how William handled the Sandringham situation reflects a genuine assessment that he got it right, that the confrontation was necessary, that the documentation was necessary, and that the boundaries being drawn around the royal family's most private properties are boundaries that needed to be drawn with exactly this level of clarity and permanence. Catherine, whose own connection to Sandringham is deeply personal and whose feelings about the protection of the royal family's private spaces mirror William's completely, was informed of the confrontation and its outcome. Sources describe her response as quiet and entirely supportive. She did not express surprise. She did not urge a softer approach or suggest that the situation might have been handled with less directness. She understood why William had done what he had done, and she understood what the Sandringham discovery had meant to him at a level that went beyond the institutional and into something considerably more personal. Because Sandringham was not just any property, it was the place where the family gathered at Christmas, where the children ran across the same grounds that William had run across as a boy, where the most private and most human dimensions of royal life played out away from every camera and every public obligation. Someone had been walking those grounds without permission, assessing them, looking at them through the lens of commercial opportunity rather than personal reverence. William had confronted that person directly. He had documented what had happened, and he had made absolutely certain that it would never happen again. That is what protecting something you love actually looks like. Not in words, in action. Permanent, documented, and completely beyond negotiation. William did not issue a statement. He did not call a press conference. He walked into a room, placed the evidence on the table, and made his position clear in terms that could not be misunderstood. Sandringham belongs to his family, and he has just demonstrated exactly what that means.